This is the Free Spirits of L&D podcast, where we talk about life as a freelancer in the fascinating world of learning and development, and ask our guests all the questions you wanted to know but were maybe too afraid to ask. Yes, we even talk about how we get business and what we all charge. At the end of each episode, each guest gets to set a bonus question for the next one. So whether you're thinking about taking the leap, brand new to freelancing, or an experienced freelancer, you won't want to miss this. In this episode, our special guest is Tom McDowall. Now, many of our listeners will know Tom from his involvement with the Learning Network, but he's also founder and chief learning geek of Evolve L&D, which is a learning and development consultancy who are all about supporting organizations to develop high impact learning strategies that actually improve performance. And I'm sure we'll talk about all the different strands and strings of that business as we go along. Welcome, Tom.
Well, thank you for having me. It's nice to come and chat.
I wanted to start with a question about your kind of origin story as a freelancer in this space. Can you tell us a bit about that?
I always felt like origin stories should start with and then I fell into radioactive goo and now I'm, Panini Man or whatever it's going to be this week.
In a world.
This is it. In actual fact, I always say, my origin story is basically the same as most people's. It's working in in-house L&D, ending up there kind of by accident, having gone into people management, having originally thought I was going to work in lighting and sound tech in theatres, and realising that's a terrible career choice if you want to have, money. Because there's none in that industry anymore. So moving around, fell into L&D, found that I really loved it, but found it incredibly frustrating to work within organisations that would go so far but not far enough. That would go, oh yeah, that's definitely the better way to do it, but we'll do it the other way instead because either that's how we've done it or there's no budget or whatever. And that's ultimately what drove me to freelance. It was surely, in my kind of younger, arrogant mind, I can do it better than everyone else, so I'll just go and do it myself. That kind of gets the edges taken off it by the real world when you realise that even as a freelancer, you don't get a free hand. In fact, arguably, you have less to work with sometimes. But at least then you have no one to blame but yourself. You're not constantly dealing with I feel like I'm being constrained by the wider business decisions, as it were. And then from there, for me, it was a case of I realized very quickly that to do really cool stuff, I needed to be more than just me. And so started initially just collaborating with other freelancers in kind of small group projects. And then eventually deciding that I had a bit more of I want to do everything collectively this way, a bit more of a vision maybe. So started kind of building Evolve up. Then actually realized that I hated running a business. Loved working in the space, hated dealing with HMRC and pensions and holiday requests and interpersonnel squabbling and all that kind of stuff. So I actually took a massive step back, was lucky enough that I could leave my business in the trusted hands and tried going back to employment for a while. It wasn't for me. I think there's a point where when you've done your own thing for a while, going back into being someone's employee is very difficult for you and for them. Actually, it's quite a difficult relationship to try and figure out. Wasn't right for me. Ended up coming back to my business and kind of really refocusing it over the last kind of 6 months into what I think is an organization able to adapt to the change that we're seeing in our industry right now. So that brings us to today, more or less.
Wow. Gosh, there's loads in there. You've just painted a bit of a picture of what's been going on for you in your freelance story. What's the time span there? How many years are we talking?
We're talking 7-8 years.
Okay.
Not a huge amount of time, but enough to kind of, I'm not one for sitting still, as it were. Everyone that works in or with Evolve knows this. What's good today may not be good next week, because we need to constantly be moving on. I've very much got this sense of the worst thing I can be is bored. Because when I get bored, I kind of stop caring. So I know that I have to keep putting something new in front of me. Otherwise, everything just stagnates.
Okay. I feel like we should come back to that in a little bit. I'd love to start with that piece around more than just me. Can you just tell us a bit about what that realization was like? What was going on for you around that point?
So, and there are two sides to it. One was the fact that a lot of there's a lot of talk in L&D about how many hats we have to wear. An instructional designer has to be a developer, an SME wrangler, a business analyst, a data person. And my opinion, having tried to do that, is that if you try and emulate that, if you try and be all those things, what you are is bad at all those things, because those are all entire careers. And I realized very quickly that not only was I wearing myself down, I was trying to do things that I'm not good at. And there's a reason that I went into, I had a passion for theatre and lighting and sound. I like language. I'm not actually that great with numbers. And there's all sorts of reasons for that, possibly linked to why I get bored so easily. But that very, very quickly came, well, why am I forcing myself to do this badly? That's a disservice to me, to my clients. And actually, it was when I had a conversation with someone who did do that for a living. They went, do you realize how insulting it is that people in your industry think they can do like a boot camp and do what I do? It's like, I studied for 10 years to get to where I am and have now been practicing for this long. You think in a weekend and a couple of e-learning courses, you can come and do it? Really? I was like, hang on, isn't that exactly what we gripe about when people say they can make their own training? There's a little bit of we need to hold the mirror up to ourselves. I was very lucky that I was then able to be like, right, okay, I know people in this space, so I'll just start, outsourcing a little bit of work to them when there is data analysis required, rather than fudging it and getting a okay-ish answer. I'll go to them. It'll be done well. It'll be done quicker, and I can confidently say that an expert has given us this analysis. And sure enough, that made me better at what I do. I wasn't wasting time on things that I wasn't well equipped to do, but I was also then able to, really, focus and use that insight to, lead where I put my energy. And that was kind of my breakthrough moment of realizing other people will make me better at the things that I do want to do. And very quickly got to the point where I was like, right, I'm going to start outsourcing development of content. Because, I don't dislike development, but it is just, to my mind, it's clicking buttons. It's a logical process. I need to build a trigger that does this and does that. And that's fine, but that doesn't fill me with joy to sit there and do it. It's a functional requirement of delivering the thing that I'm actually excited about, which is the intervention. So over time, it was very gradual. And again, initially, it was just other freelancers, other people I could grab hold of. And then eventually, as I got a bit more of I want this to be more cohesive. I don't want to go to a freelancer and then go, I'm free in 6 weeks. That's the difficulty, right? So I thought, right, let's start building a bit of an Evolve umbrella. That was kind of thinking over that. And I mean, that evolution of it all happened over maybe 6 or 7 months. It was relatively quick. I think it's that thing of once I realized it, it was such a kind of light bulb moment for me. I was like, right, why would I not keep doing this until it stops working? And there does seem to be a bit of a curve on the efficiency it brings your business versus the weight it gives your business in terms of more and more people, which is where I sort of went wrong on the initial run of it, at least.
It's really making me think a lot. I had a recent conversation with another freelancer in L&D who specializes in job crafting. That's their business, effectively. And we talk about it a lot in our industry, particularly for companies and large teams and large organizations, and the benefits of it. But I rarely hear it talked about in the context of smaller businesses, or particularly kind of freelance businesses, and how we, you use the phrase turn the mirror on ourselves. What you've just described there is job crafting. You job crafted yourself a role that meant that you could do the cool stuff that really lit you up, and outsource the stuff that, you probably could do, but wasn't really helping your business grow or you thrive.
Absolutely. And I think for me I've got a very strong sense of like why Evolve exists. Evolve exists because of the frustrations I had in-house. And the frustrations I had with watching dual consultants come into the business, extract a lot of money and leave very little value behind. And I was always very determined to never operate like that. We have an internal saying that a return customer is an unhappy customer. We don't want our customers to ever come back to us. We want to leave them equipped to not need to outsource this in future. That's our whole point, which arguably means in 5 years' time we'll have no business. But we'll deal with that in 5 years' time. We'll change what we do. But that's very much our mission. And once you start thinking like that, I find these decisions that some people go, oh, how could you get to that point? It becomes obvious. I think for me, that's when I knew that this was what I wanted to spend my time doing. When the decisions just seem logical, obvious next steps in the progression. then you know things are clicking into place. It's when those decisions are more of a, where on earth do we go next? I know we've taken a wrong turn somewhere because we seem to be lost as a business.
A bit of a practical question that's connected to all of this, because I think a lot of our listeners might be maybe 5 or so years behind where you are. Maybe they're just starting out in freelancing, setting up their businesses, establishing what lights them up and maybe what they should be outsourcing. At what stage did you start to think about the practicalities of outsourcing, the things that weren't working for you, around the budgeting side of that? Because I think a lot of people in that position will be thinking, oh gosh, I kind of have to spend money to get someone else to do this, whereas I could do it myself and retain that money in the business. How did you weigh that sort of thing up?
So I'll start with the why I'm very lucky elements of this. I'm very lucky that, my wife has a great job. She's had consistently good jobs. So we have a decent 2-income household. So we are, or I am realistically, much more able to take risks financially than many people are. So I want to caveat that, because this, if you think this is totally unfeasible for me, it may well be. Like, it's not a universal ability to do it, right? Equally, when you think about how things were in our industry, maybe 4 or 5 years before COVID, there was money falling all over the place. Yeah. Indeed, during COVID, there was as well. We went through a very, very lucrative period of time in L&D. We are no longer in that, I think it's fair to say. If I were facing these same challenges today, I may well have gone down the road of, that's a nice idea, it's for later on. So I want to caveat that. But for me, I mean, it was well within my first year of freelancing. The initial kind of excitement of, well, hey, I'm my own boss, faded to, no, actually now I have 6 bosses at any given time. And there's flexibility that comes with that and all this kind of thing. And it's not a bad thing, but the novelty wore off. And I very quickly realized that probably half of what I was spending my time on, I really disliked doing. But they were tasks that needed to be done to enable me to do the things that I love doing. And so what I actually did was look back on, so how did this work when I was in-house? Well, when I was in-house, I would go to the data ops team and I would say, hey, I need to know this, that, and the next thing about the business. Well, I can't employ a data ops team. That's unrealistic as a kind of sub 1 year freelancer. But what could I do? Well, I'm sure there are other freelancers. Let's have a look through my network. And consistently through my career, whenever I've wanted to try outsourcing something, I've always started with, who do I know that does this on a freelance basis within my network? Or if the answer is no one, who do I know that does it? And could I persuade them to try a little bit of freelancing with me and approach it that way and see if it helps, and start very, very small. So That's actually why I started with the data stuff, because 1, it has a huge impact on my business, and 2, they are very sort of tightly packaged pieces. It's data analysis on this data for this client on this project. There's no big overarching element to it. So you could package it relatively easily in usually it'd be like a set price piece of freelancing. I want this and I need this level of output. How much do you want for that? Okay, is that viable? Is it not? There were times when it wasn't, especially at first, because my pricing had not yet learned to allow for that cost. And again, this is where things are maybe different now than they were, because in the end, I basically would get a quote. I knew roughly what they were going to charge for the data analysis. That would totally be included in my costings. When I'd go to a client, I'd say, hey, we do all this data analysis. Here's the line item cost of the data analysis. And that way, if the client turned around and went, well, we want to cut, I'd like, okay, what do you want to cut off the line item?
Yeah.
Because that way they can't really complain when you go, okay, so if you want to cut the data analysis, that's cool. But I want you to understand that we will be flying completely blind. We will be building you things that we have no idea if they're the right things or if they're going to work or if they have worked. Is that okay with you? Because it's not okay with me, but you're the client.
Yeah, good.
And whilst I'm supposed to be here going, no, you should turn that client away and in the real world where we all have like bills to pay, sometimes you have to work with a client that you disagree with, and do work that you think, this is not my best possible work. You want to avoid those scenarios. You want to have conversations with them, but let's all be real. Like, we've all gone, for this client and this price point, this is what they can afford. This is what they want. And in their mind, I'm delivering them value regardless of what I think. That was really difficult for me at the start because I wanted everything to be perfect. That's why I set this thing up, right? But once it was other people, other costings, those kinds of things, that made those things very simple. Because if they didn't want it, they could cut it. But if they saw value in it, which is my job to persuade them of, obviously, then the costing was not really mine, it was theirs. I was just effectively passing the money through. But that takes time, that takes experimentation, and it takes a certain amount of willingness to lose customers as well. Like putting prices up is always a bit of a risk. You got to choose when and how and who you do it to. Like I certainly had clients back then that got services they didn't pay for because I wanted to keep them as a client. For various reasons, good logo for the brand, or sometimes just really nice, reliable clients that consistently brought us money for cash flow. So there's no kind of golden rule to it. But once you get to the point where you know what those cost is going to be, now certainly we pass it on. Like that is part of the costing. Yeah. And if people don't want to pay it, then they don't want to pay it, and that's fine. But therefore we don't work with them because that's the product that we offer. But as I said at the start, that's a somewhat luxurious position to be in. I don't want to set an unrealistic expectation of how easy that is because it's really difficult.
Yeah, I think that's a really valuable take on how to do that and a really practical way of going about that. I think I used to work for an organization where we would just habitually put the prices up so that we could justify other investments in the business. And occasionally we used to get some really angry emails back from customers. And once I had a conversation with someone who was like infuriated about the fact that, you know, they were accusing, well, you know, you're just lining your own pockets. You're just giving everyone pay rises. And I said, well, to an extent, yes, because we have a team. Would you rather that I paid them less than the cost of inflation? If you look around, all prices are going up all the time. So would you rather that we paid people less and you got less of a service from us? And it's a really difficult kind of argument, I guess, to get into with people when people are trying to justify time being linked to them personally, as opposed to being a service or a deliverable that they're going to get.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, for instance, is the danger to me of like the day rate. Because the day rate is time. I do not sell my or my team's time. Our time is our own. What we sell is outcomes, deliverables, whatever it's going to be. We sell the value back to the organization. And everyone's probably heard of value selling. It's really important, blah, 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 blah. There's 1 billion and one YouTube videos telling you why it's the only way to price and da, da, da. And realistically, like, does it work really well? It does. Do lots of people do very well selling on day rate though? Yeah, of course they do. I think day rate actually can work quite well if you are a solo practitioner. Because you have no external cost, bar maybe some software or something like that. But the minute there are others involved, day rate becomes very complicated. And especially when you're working on multiple things at once, how do you measure a day at that point? Is it the number of hours? Is it a day's worth of work dictated by you or by the client? It all gets very messy very quickly. They're a good way to stay trapped in that mindset of any increase is just for me, rather than no, actually the increase is because everything costs more now. But equally, most of us sell to businesses, not individuals. And the thing I always ask myself is, well, that business will have put its prices up. Of course it will, because businesses exist for a singular purpose, to make money. That's why they're not charities or community enterprises or anything like that. And therefore, it's actually okay to be like, yes, my priority is making money because this is what we call a job. And I do it to get money. That's okay. That can be the relationship. We don't all have to be, long-term strategic partners or the closest friends or whatever. We can just be client and provider. That's totally fine. Yeah. In fact, it makes the whole situation much easier. Like I hesitate to work with close friends and associates in terms of us providing them services because it's awkward at times when I have to turn around to them and say, hey, you've let us down on these things, therefore we can't deliver. Or this year, there's a 10% increase on our pricing. That's difficult. It's like putting your rent up on your friend versus just a tenant. So just a tenant, still people, still humans, blah, blah, blah. But sometimes it's easier to be able to have those relationships if we aren't too obsessed with, are we buddies? Are we closely tied in? It is all much more difficult than it ever sounds when people discuss it in abstract, right?
Yeah, 100%. You also touched on something that I think is going to be really important for us to talk about, because I am seeing no one talking about this. And you and I were both so we're recording this in May. We were both at the Learning Technologies Conference last month in London. We were talking about 11,000 people over the course of 2 days, lots and lots of conference sessions, loads going on in the exhibition. And on none of those stages did I hear anybody talking about the kind of economic state of the L&D industry as compared to, like you said, pre-pandemic 4 or 5 years ago. But all of the conversations that I was having with people who do what we do were about what a terribly difficult time it is to build a business at the moment. What's your take on all of this?
So my short-term take is basically like, yeah, it's really tough. Slightly longer view is that this is nothing new. We are actually a bit of a boom and bust industry. When we look back, we always joke, we're the first to be cut. But there's a reason for that. And it's usually because it's deferred impact. You can cut your L&D activity today and you're not going to feel it tomorrow. Yeah. You're not going to feel it a month later. It's probably going to be 6 months to a year later when you start to feel the pain of onboarding is no longer as effective. There's been no or fewer performance implementations. Maybe there's a compliance issue that comes up. There's also, again, talking about that kind of mirroring on us, there's also the question of if we're always the first to get cut, that means people don't generally perceive us as valuable. So there's some work for us there. But this is nothing new. This has happened. I mean, this is the second time in my L&D career, which is not really that long in we're talking about 12, 13 years tops, that I've seen this happen. We had a huge boom when I first started freelancing, the couple of years running up to COVID and COVID itself. We're now seeing the busts that you get after every boom, the same as every business is. The difference is right now, I think we happen to be having our bust at the same time as cost of living increases and all this sort of stuff. So I think we're kind of getting hit from both sides, which is maybe the slightly more unusual element of it. The good I see in that is that we know this will pass. Like, it will look different coming out the other side because we're seeing a general lack of funding, but we're also seeing huge technological shifts at the same time, and we're seeing huge social shifts. Those three things can't happen and us go back to, don't worry, I know storyline at the end of the sort of bump. We do have to be looking at how we adapt. Certainly that's what we've been doing. We've totally reshaped sort of what Evolve does, totally changed. One part of the business doesn't exist anymore. Like everything else, it's really complicated, and I don't want to downplay the impact it has on people, because I think there is a general view that freelancers and contractors are very well off universally, and that we can just weather storms, and some can. I always say I've been extremely lucky in my career. I have no special skills that put me in this position versus other people who I know are actually far more talented than I, far more talented than I, that are really struggling today. It was luck and timing that got me to the point where I can kind of look at the current scene and go, this year, hopefully we can get some more work in than we have coming in at the minute, but we'll be all right. We'll survive. But we're not going to be able to make any big plays. That's the sad reality. We're going to have to be somewhat conservative in what we do and don't take on for the rest of the year. And we see that in the big businesses, which is really interesting. So in terms of sponsorships of events, in terms of just presence, even at the big events, far fewer people. I was chatting to some people who are at ATD this week. And like, it is a little bit quieter than I expected it to be. And ATD, like, it's a phenomenal event. Anyone who ever gets the opportunity, just grab it and go. It is one of the best conferences, of the kind of big expo-driven conferences. I would really rate it quite highly. But yeah, rooms not quite as full, lots of sort of uncertainty and nervousness. Certain brands you might expect to see in the expo not there. Lots of AI companies, but they're generally burning venture capital money. And that's the weird element of what we're seeing now, is whilst we and internal L&D departments and kind of what you might call classic L&D vendor companies are all in pretty much the same spot of people just don't want to spend right now. New kind of adventurous AI-driven edtech isn't being driven by sales, it's being driven by venture capital. Which kind of gives this top illusion of there being a lot of money, which there isn't really. Because it's not what I would call real money. It's investment that they're quite happy to literally just throw into the AI furnace to see what comes out the other end. Now, I'm not saying that as it's evil and it's bad and we should all be worried about it, but just that's the reality of where the money is right now in the space.
I was really struck by that. I spent some time walking around the exhibition at LearnTech, and I mean, you almost would expect it at that kind of conference, which is all about technology. And of course, anyone wanting to talk about was in what sense does AI impact this, and this? But yeah, walking around, there are lots of really shiny, clearly well-funded stands that were that were selling effectively AI solutions. That's the industry that's booming at the moment. And then no doubt there will be a cycle that goes on in that industry as well that's kind of working within our own cycle. But yeah, I'm glad to hear you say that, because I've been reflecting on it a lot. I had a bit of an existential crisis at that conference going. There was a presenter in the first keynote on day one who was going through some research around what CEOs are looking for from L&D businesses and how that's shifted over time. And what she was presenting was, the cutting edge, bleeding edge version of that research was that CEOs, their number one focus is growth. And somewhere in the middle of that list was developing people. And there was quite a big shock, sort of gasp from the audience when she revealed that. And part of that, I think we have to get over our own biases and egos when we go, why is L&D not at the top of the chart? But there's also a sort of a sense of going, well, who's actually going to drive any of that growth? Who's going to make that growth happen, if not the people who are working in the business? Because if you're even downsizing, I know a lot of companies downsizing at the moment, there's not going to be any growth comes from that. You might save some money off the bottom line, but I just don't know. It's a really unusual climate at the moment, I think, in this industry. I've not seen it before in kind of 20 years.
And I must admit, I've got to be honest, it disappoints me how shocked L&D people are when they are told growth is the top priority and that we're further down the list. Because again, I think it shows that belief that we bought into the messaging of when business, training's at the heart of our business. It's what we're all about our people. It's like, no business that has survived more than a couple of years actually believes that. That's not what businesses do. Businesses exist to extract value from a consumer and provide it to shareholders. Once we just acknowledge that simple truth, that has always been the case. From the birth of commerce to today and for forever, that's what companies, which are legal entities, not people, they're legal entities, that's what they do. And that will always be their priority. And it's not because people are evil. This isn't an anti-capitalist rant. We can do that later. I've got plenty of those. But what this really is as a director of a company, and we probably both know this, right? You have what's called a fiduciary responsibility to maximize the profitability of your business. That is your legal obligation. So they're not bad for doing it. They're doing their job. We are, in L&D, a servant enterprise. We exist to enable what they want to achieve. We need to stop thinking, I think, that we are the most important thing. Because yes, that we are going to train the people who deliver the growth. But that's our role. We are the thing that drives the thing that delivers the thing they actually care about. If you could swap out training for, and I argue you probably could often, higher wages. I genuinely believe in most organizations, if you doubled the wage of every employee, you would see a bigger performance spike than anything L&D could deliver.
Interesting. Yeah.
And that is, not a commercial reality, but we should have in the back of our heads, if we claim to be the drivers of growth, the drivers of performance, could we easily be replaced with some cash? And if so, what the hell are we doing? And I think we have to be, especially when times are tough, it's nice to be supportive of each other. I'm not saying we need to rag on each other or say, L&D's rubbish. I don't particularly like that, because actually I think L&D is full of highly passionate, engaged people, especially the freelance space, that care about what they do, that desperately want to do a good job. But the core to being able to deliver real value is to be really harsh with ourselves and say, if no one wants our services, why is that? Because if we could say to them, if their top priority is growth, and we could actually say to them, we will drive that growth, and they believed us, they would hire us. So where is that breaking down?
Yeah.
We've got to use this as a moment of reflection. Otherwise, we do create that kind of doomed future for ourselves that everyone's so worried about.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. There was another interesting session driven by a kind of CIO, CAIO, where he painted this really interesting picture. Some might say utopian picture of an AI future 5 years down the line. So not that far in the future, where you will genuinely have systems that are able to apply the scientific method and generate very complex and novel solutions to existing large complex problems, such as climate change and the issue of universal basic income and the 4-day or the 3-day working week, and automating agriculture to an extent that food poverty will no longer be a thing. And somebody in the audience put their hands up and said, well, what if somebody would use that kind of power for evil? And his response, it's kind of really stayed with me. His response was, well, why would you care? Because the sort of person who would use that kind of power for evil is currently using their power to control you by limiting access to energy and resources. If you no longer were controlled in that way, how would that change what you did? I was like, you could almost hear the whole audience just go, on some level, our industry's in that state of going, what would happen if we stopped thinking ourselves as trainers or even consultants and coaches and facilitators and thought about, well, in that kind of future, how do we add value for people? If we were given more of a free choice about how we spent our time and how people invested their energy in us, what is it likely that they would want us to be doing? And it's a big question that will take a lot longer than the time we've got today to really delve into, but it's really stayed with me.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is that kind of what if, rather than asking the question about how do we scale what we do, how can it help me do what I do, how do I instead say, how can I completely remake the world? What does this enable us to do as a species that we've never been able to do? There are these huge potentials, and the kind of emergent technologies that we're seeing today are like mind-blowing and incredibly exciting. But we simultaneously sometimes underestimate them in terms of what they could do and overestimate them in terms of what they're culpable for. None of that evil, as it were, is inevitability. The technology isn't going to do it. A person is going to do it. When people complain about our AI is making content on the internet terrible and blah, 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 blah. No, people are doing that. That AI isn't taking over their LinkedIn accounts and posting messages. AI isn't taking over YouTube things and recreating videos for people, blah, blah. No, people are using technology in a new way. And for those of us who remember the internet in its infancy, we remember the first round of chatbots and the thises and the that's and the automated sort of attacks that used to happen on certain sites. And we remember how as soon as the technology appeared, it was used for something bad, or someone used it to try and get ahead of someone else. And would it be nice if that didn't happen? Yes, of course it would. But knowing that it will, well, okay, how does that reshape our thinking of the world? And I think ultimately you have to take a step back from me, my job, my household to really think about this stuff. Otherwise, you adopt an inherently selfish and short-termist view, though that doesn't, by the way, delegitimize the concerns that come from that, because I can go, on a societal level, blah, 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 I do actually still care about having a job. But I'm not going to pretend somehow we need to be utterly selfless. Let's be honest. Especially as freelancers, we do tend to look at most big changes and say, okay, how does this impact me? Let's start there. Let's work out when I've got the scope to. I can't fix humanity's problems, but I can try and make sure that me and my team have got work for the next 6 months or whatever. And that's just going to be a case of we are going to have to get real used to pivoting. If you have done the same thing for the last 10 years, you ain't going to be doing it anymore. Or you're going to go bust. It is my feeling. There's going to be very little room for, what do you do? I create courses. Why? But it's just going to be from a business perspective, why would I pay someone to do that? That is going to become such a low skilled, unfortunately, that's my view. It's going to become a very low skilled application of what we do in L&D. We're going to have to change.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. I'm going to move us on to a question that was posed by our previous guest, Paul Matthews. And it was a really interesting one that I've still been thinking about myself. His question was, in the context of your L&D business and freelancing L&D, what's your golden rule?
Weirdly, this is actually an easy one for me. There's only one golden rule in Evolve, and that is be easy to work with. And that doesn't mean do whatever the client wants. But it means we keep it in mind with every interaction we have. How do I make this as easy as possible for the people that I'm with? Now, that goes for the initial conversations with clients. That goes for the technology we choose to use. And that means we aren't dogmatic about things. Going back to when we create content for people, if they would go, oh, well, we want to build everything in Gomo, let's say. Cool, we'll use Gomo. Why would we insist on using something else? What, just because we think it's better. If everything in-house is Gomo, what would be daft to use something else, wouldn't we? Right, we'll figure that out. Now, when we're consulting, we take a very strong stance that consulting should be high challenge, but it shouldn't be combative. And it so often is. It's so often we're the experts, you know nothing, you'll do what we say. When we go in, I always try and remember what it was like to be in an L&D team that was having to work with external consultants. And I remember being dictated to, being ignored, having my ideas taken by the consultant and presented as their own. And so we try and do the opposite. We go in, we talk to the L&D teams, we champion their ideas internally. And for that reason, you know, that kind of be easy to work with isn't quite as simple as it initially sounds, but it's our kind of simplified sort of front of mind version of, in this moment, how can I make this easier for my client or the person within the client's organization that I'm working with? And it's, touch wood, kept us in good stead.
Thank you for that. Would you like to set a question for our next guest?
Yeah, I mean, I would love for the next guest to have a think about if they could experiment with any one thing that they currently do with a big change. What would it be, and what would that experiment look like?
Lovely. Would you like to have a crack at that for you? Yeah,
I mean, something that I'm toying with, but ultimately I think it's going to be one of those big plays that has to wait, is looking, we developed some web apps, and what I would love to do is create a kind of cohesive ecosystem that they sit in. It would inevitably involve some kind of AI driver, because I would love to see a situation where we had data analysis, decision-making, content creation, and or linking off to other internal campaign settings, emails, WhatsApp, whatever, measurement, all that sort of stuff bundled into one package. It would be a very, very tech heavy in terms of what we need to build it, but very lightweight approach for the organization to step away from the LMS, the authoring tool, the running around trying to gather data, to bring that all into one simple flow that an L&D professional could be checking. We'd probably be talking about some element of AI agent in there, that you could have a kind of data analytics agent that works with your data analytics department to kind of contextualize their work, so they haven't got to do specific work for the L&D team, all those kinds of things. It's one of those put that on the wall ideas that we've got as a business. We spent a few weeks on it and then kind of went, this is a when the industry is in a better place kind of discussion. But that's where my mind's going at the minute in terms of experiments we want to conduct.
That's amazing. I love the idea of that. I think I keep coming back to this idea of kind of the future, I think, of our industry is something that's curative and allows you to build connections between lots of separate things. There are not that many services and products that let you do that at the moment, but lots of services and products exist. So if there's something that can sit in the middle of it all and pull it together in a way that's meaningful for people, I think that's there's going to be a lot of value in that space.
Yeah, it's interesting because we see it in every other industry, which is the thing that kind of blows my mind. I think this tech explosion we're seeing now, that's where we should be harnessing it, less about mass production and more about mass connection.
Wonderful. Cool. On that bombshell, I'm going to leave you with our final question before we start to wrap up. And it's a question we ask everyone that we have as a guest. And you've touched on it already because you talked about getting away from day rates. But when it does come round to pricing, what do you charge?
This is why we don't price on day rate, because if someone says, what's your day rate? But well, anything between 400 and 3,000. Depends on what you want us to do. And, you know, a lot of what we do now is actually deliver labs to organizations. So we'll go in and we'll spend several days over a certain amount of time helping people develop a specific skill set. Sometimes it's using an authoring tool. More often, though, it's something consultative or it's being able to experiment. Our kind of flagship thing is how your L&D team can become an experimental kind of R&D department as opposed to an L&D department. So, for instance, if someone brings us in to run that program, they're going to be looking at between £10,000 and £15,000 for that initial kind of lab on conducting experimentation. If they ask us to build them a module, we don't do much of that anymore, but when we do, that's usually when I'll bring in some sort of freelancers who will then give me their day rates. I'll aggregate them and give them a sort of package price. Pricing for us, we kind of price on a product basis. So like I said, we'll have, we've got our Evolve labs. We have a level 1, 2, and 3 Evolve lab. So we can say, okay, well, per lab, you can have up to 8 people. Level 1, I think, is around £3,000. We do it in 3/4 of a day online. It's a great thing. You do that as a day rate. You say, oh, it's $3,000 day rate. People go, what? That's insane. You're like, well, actually, I'm training 8 of your people to deliver infinite value through the ability to use this tool. I would argue it's actually quite cheap. It's, I think for us, product pricing makes a lot more sense because we have these predefined things. When someone does ask us to build something entirely bespoke, I never present them with a day rate. I think that's the biggest thing. Even if internally, especially when working with freelancers, a lot of them will give me a day rate. But I will say, well, the product will take this long. We have to have really strong conversations about that to say, look, this is the scope. It needs to be delivered in this time frame. We need to build accordingly. And then I take them an absolute cost. One, they know what they're paying. I think that's really important right now. When people are nervous about spending money, the worst thing you can do is give them a day rate and then say, and it takes as long as it takes. So what you're saying is, I refuse to tell you the price. That's a blunt way of putting it, but that's how it comes across right now. So yeah, that's kind of our pricing structure and kind of indicative on how we very much value our people's time. If I'm asking people to do something, I like to think that we pay them a good wage. Different tasks cost different amounts. Data analysis is an example of a very high day rate. Generally speaking, for most freelance data people we work with, we will be paying them £650, £700 a day. Because their skill set is very expensive. I think that's the one thing as an industry we shouldn't slide back on. We worked very hard to make sure people were earning good money. And I think it's easy right now to try and, I'll just keep cutting so that I can get some work in. The more we cut, the harder we will have to fight later to get it back up.
Do you know, that's making me think about your golden rule as well. I think there's probably, it goes in multiple ways, doesn't it? That golden rule about being good to work with and easy to work with, because you don't want to be the kind of, provider of associate services where associates go, actually, they pay peanuts, but they give you a gig every now and again. You want them to be able to go, yes, they pay really fairly. And if they ask, I'm going to say yes to them because they're great to work with and they're easy to work with. So there's all of those different elements to it, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I know that I can ask a lot from my team because they know that at the core of everything I ask for is a knowledge that they are incredibly valuable.
Yeah.
I think if you start on not just on a low rate, but therefore a low estimation of them, it's very difficult to then ask them to really bring their full skill set to bear. And why should they? You work to the point at which you're being paid. As much as I love what we do, would I do it for free? No. But there's a value attached to it, and therefore I want to be paid, and it's the exact same for them. And that's really important, I think. Simple, but sometimes forgotten, I think.
Yeah, very much so. Thank you so much, Tom. You've shared an enormous amount of information, I think, for any aspiring freelancer or even someone who's a little bit earlier on in that journey to you. Thank you so much for everything that you've shared on the podcast today. If people wanted to find out a bit more about you, what you do, how they can work with you, how can they get in touch with you?
Easiest way is always LinkedIn. I'm pretty present on there all over the shop. Just search Tom McDowall or Evolve L&D, or you can go to evolve-ld.com and there's a contact form on there that comes straight to me because that's the one thing I don't trust anyone else to do is respond to emails from the website. Plus it's a dull job, let's be honest. So it's probably best that I still do that bit.
Super duper. Thanks again, Tom.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
If you enjoyed this episode, let us know by leaving a review on your favourite podcast app. It really makes a difference. And if you want to learn more about how L&D Free Spirits can lift up your freelancing business, you can find out more information at ldfreespirits.com.